What is more past than erased? Let me get us set up here. So I have three possible ways I'm going to start this, and I choose this one. I do that for my own sanity because I've been talking about this book for the last 2 years. It was published in April of 2020. And I started talking about it before it was published. And I was workshopping it and started saying the words Mill Creek Valley. And then I realized that so many people had not even heard of it. So when I said, well, it's east of Grand where St. Louis University is, and it's west of Union Station, and Market Street was the center of it. And then I just watched this expression of puzzlement that people never heard of it, or they've never been in it, or we drove by it, or I was a student at St. Louis University when they were tearing it down, and so it was pretty much erased. So what I'd like to do today is to read a short passage. For those of you who have not read my book, it's called The Last Children of Mill Creek, because I was, in fact, in that group of children who were the last to live in that neighborhood, that community. So I'm going to read to you The Cat. And this passage introduces the little girl who pretty much tells the story of her community, her family, her neighbors, her church, her school. So you get to meet her. It's called The Cat. That's what we call the mottled gray, muscular tabby that roamed the perimeter of our cold water two-family dwelling we called home. It strode, brushing against the fences between the yards and the back alley like a predator, methodically patrolling its territory. I always knew it was there, but I didn't look directly at it. We never thought of the cat as a family pet. It was utilitarian, practical, like a farm animal. Its purpose was to control the rats. We didn't name it or touch it. We didn't feed it. Mama must have given it water and scraps during the day, which accounts for its loyalty to our house. All we wanted was for the cat to hunt rats at night. In late fall and winter, the rats came inside at night. Daddy and the boys plugged holes with steel wool, held in place with chicken wire, and hammered flattened tin cans in corners where the floor and the baseboards met. Huge, powerful rat traps had permanent positions in the stone-walled basement where my brother slept in summer. On a brisk November evening, my brother Honey and I were sitting on the back steps waiting for the last light of day to fade before we had to go inside for the night. The cat slowly emerged from behind the coal shed at the far end of the backyard and paused, as if to indicate it was her yard now. Honey glanced up, and while rising from the steps, he confessed to an unasked query. I'm more afraid of the cats than the rats, especially at night when they sound like babies crying in the alley. I was reassured to hear it was cats I heard at night and not babies. As if egged on by the cat's appearance, we entered our dimly lit kitchen and closed the door behind us. I slept every night with my clunky brown school shoes held snug against my chest. Other 6-year-old girls might have snuggled up with a rosy-cheeked doll or the soft pile of a well-loved teddy bear. Not me. I didn't even like dolls and teddy bears. My shoes were the security against the threat of the mostly unseen nighttime rats that scurried across the floor and gnawed at something within the walls next to my bed. In a moderately successful attempt to curtail my bedwetting, I'd hold tightly to my trusted shoes just in case I had to get up and go to the toilet in the dark. With all the courage I could muster, I'd throw my shoe as hard as I could into the middle of the floor and wait for the rats to retreat deeper into the walls. Everybody had their nighttime maneuvers for dealing with the rats. The older girls used the toilet before going to bed and didn't have to get up during the night. That didn't work for me. Mama said I had a small bladder. My brother Honey, who coached me on my nocturnal plan of action, slept with his trusty stick and could occasionally be heard striking a sharp blow to the floorboards. Sometimes at night, when all was finally quiet, there would be abrupt but familiar skirmishes followed by a cacophony of screeching and squeaks and scratching claws and thumps and thuds. At first, I sucked in a sharp breath and stiffened. Then, raising my head slightly to hear with both ears, my eyes opened wide against the darkness of the middle room, where I slept in one of 4 bunk beds. My younger brother, Furman, slept peacefully at the opposite end. Though staring into the night, I didn't want to see anything. My wide open eyes just made me more alert. I listened with my whole body. After a long, tense minute of quiet, I could hear the cat crunching on the bones of a dead rat. A calm washed over me. I relaxed. I was safe. The cat had done its job. Thank you. So I'm going to show you a few pictures. Okay. Did I pull it out?
You didn't do anything wrong. I think it just glitched a little.
Okay. If this doesn't work, we're in trouble. I have to read another story.
No, we'll be okay. There are other ways to get your pictures up on there.
There we go. Ah, yay. A memoir about, thank you, a memoir about survival, as told from the viewpoint of a watchful young girl. This is our house on at 2649 Bernard Street in Mill Creek Valley. There, we couldn't find a picture of the house, so I told my brother one night that I was going to do a talk and I didn't have a picture of the house, so he drew one and emailed it to me the next morning. So this is, it looks a lot better than it really did look. Childhood is for most of us where our true home resides. That was written as a blurb by my friend Angela Mitchell. These are my siblings. I wasn't born yet. If any of you have read the book, you probably know some of these people by name. It's Laverne and Randall and Honey, Tootie, Beverly, and Carol Jean. And this is Honey and Randall. They were a pair. My mother had this way of managing her children. The 4 oldest were responsible for the 4 youngest. And Randall was responsible for hunting. And throughout the book, you will read about how he reluctantly took on that responsibility, Randall. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. I don't know what happened. They disappeared. This is not good.
Is there a slide after that, maybe? After that other screen?
Let's see if I can do it this way. No, it's dying on me. These are the slides. I swear I have them. Oh, I don't know what's going on. Well, shoot. Help.
Is it saved in your computer or is it online?
Did this move? No.
It's online.
It's not loading just like you can. Give me 1 second.
You can always open a different folder.
Okay,
Let's
can we
try
go
that.
back up to here and see if it comes up? No.
1 second, folks. We've got another file we can try and use.
If we take one of these, maybe,
Mhm.
will it come up?
Is that this one, or is there a different one?
Well, it's close enough, if it'll open.
It would help if I knew how to use a Mac, which I don't. How do I get to this? Because we can just open up a different. I've got to
Okay.
put it on there twice for you, so that we can
Okay,
try a
let's
different
go
one.
over here. Let's get this out of the way and get this out of the way. And where is it?
Could we, how about I just plug it back in again?
Okay, sorry.
These things happen.
There it is.
Okay, let's open that. And let's
This is
try.
the second one.
Is that the one you tried before?
Who knows?
Okay, let's try that one then. The tension mounts.
Dun, 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 dun.
Okay,
Okay.
let's see, where did we?
Let's go about here. Ta-da!
This is why we have backups of backups. There we go.
Okay, so quickly, these are my parents. This is my mother, Frances Elizabeth. This is my father, Randall Henry Ross, my older sister Laverne, and my older brother Randall. My mother came to St. Louis as a college student on summer break to work and visit some cousins. My father came probably 10 years before her to attend high school. The top, I think it's your right picture, is probably the bottom one is what she looked like when she first came to St. Louis. The top one was after, in her own words, after 8 kids. That's my dad. That's probably what he looked like when my mother first met him. He was a singer, a quartet singer. That's him on the far right with the dimples. And the bottom picture is one of my favorites because it's the last picture he, his mother, and his stepfather took before they left Arkansas for him to come to St. Louis to attend high school. There was no high school for black children in the town or near the town where he lived. So his mother packed them up and moved to St. Louis because she heard that Vashon High School had been built 2 years before. This is one of only 2 pictures of all of us. We joined the NAACP as a family, and the newspaper came and took our picture. That's me down at the bottom with the braids. There was another picture with me looking at the camera, but I had a really silly look on my face, so I chose to give you the braids. This picture is interesting. I hope you can see it. It gives you an idea of what the houses look like, how densely populated it was. But in the far center of the picture, that's the Continental building on Olive and Grand. To the left of that was I think called Jesuit Hall, and to the left of that little steeple is Xavier Church, the college church. So you get a sense of how close it was to St. Louis University. All the way to the right, you can't quite see it, but the Fox Theater is there. Let's see. This is an interesting picture because Mill Creek was actually a creek before it was railroad tracks. And before it named a community. And at the far right would be about Spring, which is the source of the creek. It was Rock Creek on Spring, which is probably why Spring is called Spring. And it flowed east down to the Mississippi River. The large portion there was where it was dammed so that it could be a water source for a flour mill. It also was the site of the first city park for St. Louis downtown. The Mississippi River is all the way to that far end. So it's kind of imposed over this grid, so that you can get a sense of where it was. At the top is Park, that long street is Park. At the bottom is Washington. So it's between Park, Choteau, Washington. Market Street kind of goes diagonally down the middle of it. Right in the middle where you see those kind of lines coming together is basically Union Station today. So there actually was a creek. This is an interesting map because it gives you a real sense of the boundaries. At the top here is Grand, diagonally, Market Street, all the way down. At this end would be about Union Station. Jefferson, Ewing, Compton, Cardinal, and Grand. So about this top third, that right in the center of the green area is Vashon High School, one of only 4 buildings that was left standing out of 457 acres, 4 buildings. One was Berea Church, Berea Presbyterian Church. Out of 42 churches, only 1 church was left, and Vashon High School. Let's see what else about this. At the bottom here would be the railroad tracks, or where the creek once was. And can't see my cursor. But it was pretty densely populated. You don't see any parks. To the left of Vashon High School, those 2 small buildings, one is now the Vashon Community Center that's being renovated as a jazz museum now. But that large white space was once the site of the St. Louis Stars Negro League baseball team. These are just some clippings from articles around the time that there was a push to get a proposal to get funding to match the federal funds for tearing down that community. So there was a big effort by realtors, by the newspaper, by city government, federal government to really get rid of that area. It was called a slum, and we were called slum dwellers, when in fact it was a segregated community of a full community. So there were Black professionals, school teachers, doctors, lawyers, lots of churches, beautiful housing. A lot of the housing stock was exactly the same that's in Lafayette Square and Soulard today. But there was a huge effort to make it be a slum, and therefore it deserved to be demolished. This is an interesting house. I mentioned in the book that it was a segregated community when they tore it down, but before that, it was just downtown. Everybody who came, all the immigrant groups who came into St. Louis lived downtown and eventually moved north, south, and west, but everybody lived there first. And this is a home that was built by George Barnett, the architect who designed the governor's mansion, lots of buildings in the Botanical Garden area, a very famous St. Louis architect, but this was his home that he built right off of Jefferson and Lawton in Mill Creek. And in the 1880s, in the 1940 census, it was a rooming house with 9 residents listed on the census. None of them own the house. This is an interesting photograph of Market Street. You can see here Union Station on the right. Right in the middle there is I think it's the Civil Courts building. Next to it is what was Southwestern Bell at the time. And right in the center over here to the, I don't know if we're doing stage lefts or rights or not, but it's where the new soccer stadium is going to be. So when I'm talking to students in schools, that's how I open. I talk about the soccer stadium and they go, oh. This map I got permission to use from the Broken Heart of America. And I like it because it gives you the sense of what it was like when it was populated and what it looked like once it was torn down and the highway went in. And so that gray strip is what went in, and all of the white took decades to fill in. So all of that entire community was torn down and displaced, and there was no real plan of what to do with the rest of it, except there would be a plan to make a plan. These are interesting statistics that I just got last week, frankly. I was I was on a panel, and I asked one of the other panelists if she knew the percentage of home ownership of the people who lived there, and she did not know. And someone in the audience the next day sent this to me, or told me where I could find it. So around 1959, when this was done as a study, only 484 people of color, non-white people, were owners out of 35, almost 3,600 residents. So about 11.9% of the homes were owned by Black people in this community, which I thought was very, very interesting. Another interesting fact was the people who were displaced only got up to $100 to move from the federal funds that came down for that. That was also pretty interesting to me, because I have not found out. My grandmother owned her home, and I never did find out exactly how much they paid her for her home, but only my grandmother was part of that less than 12% who owned their homes. This is just a fun fact for me. Some of you might be familiar with the Compton Dry maps. They're pictorial maps that were drawn of St. Louis in 1875. And they're fascinating to look at because some of the buildings are still there, or you can remember where some of those buildings were. Circled here is Lincoln Elementary School. That little diagonal line there again is Market Street. You can always tell where Market Street is on a map. Going that way is Jefferson. That's Lincoln Elementary School in 1875, and to the right is Lincoln Elementary School around 1955, when I started kindergarten there. When I talked to the people at the soccer stadium, I reminded them that if my school were still there and I was playing in the schoolyard, I'd be able to look down into the practice field of the soccer stadium. These are some of the churches that were torn down. They were beautiful, many of them were beautiful churches because they were the oldest churches in the city. All of the congregations, all the Presbyterians and the Jewish synagogues and the Baptist churches that started in the city and moved west eventually, left beautiful churches behind. The brown building, brick building there is St. Malachi, the only Catholic church in Mill Creek. And at the bottom is St. Malachi after the wrecking ball hit it for the first time. This is our church. Again, when you read the book, you'll read a lot about this church. My father had a job for public service. He worked on the streetcar tracks, to repair streetcar tracks. His second job was the janitor of this church. His third job was the music director of the church. So he would often be at church cleaning and making repairs, and then about 7:30 he'd stop and direct the choir. This picture is very interesting because my brother, Honey, is an artist. He's retired now, and in retirement he restores old picture frames. So he often stops at yard sales and resale shops and rummage sales, all kinds of things like that, runs in and looks through the picture frames because he knows what he's looking for. So one day he went in and this picture was in a frame. And so there was something familiar about it, but he wasn't sure. And he looked at it closely and he realized it was our church. Not only our church, right in the center is Reverend Felix Shepherd. My brother's name is Shepherd Ross, who's named after Felix Shepherd, who was our pastor. To the left of, can you hear me? Yep. To the left of Reverend Shepherd is my grandmother. So you can imagine the status of standing next to the pastor in these pictures. Right in front of my grandmother is my oldest sister, Laverne. And at the corner, you can see there's a man who looks like he has on an army hat, that little hat that they wear. That happens to be my father. And so we can pinpoint this picture because my father was only in the Army for 6 months because he had 8 children. They sent him home. So we know that this is late 1941. So I was able to just with a magnifying glass go through this picture and find so many people. So this is a really special picture, and this picture is hanging in the Missouri History Museum. This is the one church that was left standing. It's Berea Presbyterian Church, and this is the back of the church, and it's about at Cardinal and Olive Street, if you know where Pappy's Barbecue is, on Olive, just east of St. Louis University. This church is immediately to the east. You don't really see it from the street very much because there's a big parking lot in front of it. But that is the one church, and it now also belongs to St. Louis University. That's the church in 1956, just 3 years before they demolished Mill Creek. So you don't see this beautiful front of the church. The front of this church now backs up to dumpsters. It has a cyclone fence around it and stacks of wood. And then it backs up to the rear of a dormitory at the Harris-Stowe State University. So it's just such a shame, but that's a beautiful church in a beautiful neighborhood. In the book, again, so hopefully some of you read it or some of you will, my mother was a craftsperson, an artist who worked from our home, and she crocheted and quilted and made crafts, picture frames, all kinds of things that she sold. And this is a few of the crochet items that are still around. We didn't have the forethought to keep a lot more of them. As a matter of fact, she made them to sell, so they're around somewhere. This is my family again. the second picture of all of us. And this was because my brother Randall in the center was home from basic training, so we took a family picture. And this is my wedding in New York City. Look how I'm looking at my new husband. That's my father in the middle. That's Honey, tall in the back. My sister Carol G, my brother Pat. And my dad. My dad came to my wedding in New York. My mother had already passed away, and it was his first time flying, and he died 6 months later. So this is the last picture we have of him. So that's my life in a nutshell in Mill Creek Valley. It was a place that was dear to me. I write this book from approximately age 4 to about age 13 when we moved out of Mill Creek into the west end of the city, which is now being called north of Del Mar. And I delve into how we got there and what that transition was like. So I hope some of you, all of you, take an opportunity to learn firsthand about what it was like to live during that time and how we survived a kind of isolation and exile within that community, how supportive it was, how it encouraged us, how we valued education and religion, and I made it. Thank you. And I'll be around to answer questions if any of you have some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So much. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I was confident that that would have been incredible if the slideshow had not worked, but